Well, for the first time in a long time, Apple has released both a public iOS release and a developer beta in the same day. So today we not only got iOS 26.2.1 earlier, which I did make a video on, but we also received iOS 26.3 Beta 3 for registered developers and soon for public beta testers. And along with this update, we also got iPadOS 26.3, watchOS 26.3, macOS Tahoe 26.3, along with tvOS, HomePod, and visionOS 26.3 Beta 3. But of course, as you can tell from the title, this video is all about iOS 26.3 Beta 3 and what is new in the update. So first off, the very first thing you'll notice with this update is that it's over 11 gigabytes on my iPhone 17 Pro Max. Of course, it's not going to take up that much space, but you can see it is just under 12 gigabytes. So a very large update size coming from 26.3 Beta 2. Let's go ahead and check out the build number for this new version. If we head into our settings here, the new build is 23D5114D. So we are still on a D for the build number. So that's interesting. We'll talk about what that could mean near the end when we talk about what to expect next. So also down here, we do have a 1.40.03 modem firmware for the 17 series. All right, so now what's new here in iOS 26.3 Beta 3? And as you guys know, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know not to expect a ton of new features or changes as we approach the final release of a software, especially a 0.3 update. So don't expect any type of major changes with this update. I have noticed some small changes, it seems, to the animations, specifically inside of music. This is very subtle and it might just be placebo, to be honest, but when I go down right here, when I go out of the now playing view and into, the bottom right there, the animation feels a bit smoother. And you'll also notice that the liquid glass, it shifts a little bit quicker than it did on Beta 2, which I have on the left. Like I said, it's very subtle. I'm honestly just looking for anything that's changed. I'm really dissecting the software, trying to find any little thing that's changed because there's not much, but that is something I did want to mention. You guys test it out and see if you notice a difference there as well. It's less choppy, it's more smooth now. Also in iOS 26.3 Beta 2, I had this really weird bug where it would show my focus mode right here on the right-hand side, and where I'm supposed to have notifications, it's just completely blank, and it does not allow me to tap on that to open up those notifications. So that's happened to me a few times, and you can see it's actually still persisting here in this instance. So sometimes it will fix itself, but you can see this time I have to clear it, and if it comes back, it'll probably work again, but that is a bug I've been facing on Beta 2, and I've been testing that here with Beta 3, and that does appear to be fixed. So if you had issues with the notification center, especially on the lock screen, being bugged out when you're in a focus mode, that thankfully appears to be fixed. I notice that almost daily on my main device. Now here's a really interesting change in iOS 26.3 Beta 3, and this is a new feature that's found in the code, and this was found by Aaron P over on Twitter, and it says that this new feature limits the precise location from cellular networks. So basically what this does is it limits the precision of your location data that is available to mobile networks unless you are location sharing during an emergency. That kind of overrides this feature if you have it set. And as you can see from the code, this does not work for every carrier and in every location. So this is limited to these carriers that you see right here in the US, UK, Germany, and Thailand. And you can see that this feature does also require the C1 modem, the C1 inside of the iPhone. So that's the iPhone Air, iPhone 16e, and iPad Pro M5. Now, unfortunately, I do not have Boost Mobile as my carrier, so I am not able to see this toggle. However, you might see this in your cellular settings if you do have Boost Mobile and you update to iOS 26.3 Beta 3, and of course on the final version as well. Now, keep in mind, Apple does say that reducing location precision will not impact signal quality or user experience, and it does not affect the precision of location data provided to emergency responders during an emergency call, like I mentioned earlier. And man, I can already see law enforcement agencies getting very upset at Apple for offering this as a feature. Now, right now, it is very limited with the carriers. It's only Boost Mobile in the US. However, I would not be surprised to see this roll roll out to additional carriers with time. And that's when it's probably going to make waves, across the internet, and they're going to get a hold of that and be pretty upset. But we'll have to see how this develops and how this actually looks in the next couple of months. Now, one of the other big new features in iOS 26.3 is inside of settings, general, all the way down to the bottom, we have transfer or reset iPhone. And then down here, we have transfer to Android. So that's going to be a big new feature because this is going to allow you to put your iPhone next to an Android and be able to transfer your data wirelessly, and you'll be able to transfer more data now, and it should be more efficient than before. So I will be testing this out. I will put this tutorial in my what's new video for 26.3, but that is something that is new, and that should help a lot of users transfer over if you would ever like to. Now, you might recall in the first beta of iOS 26.3, if you go into notifications, there was a setting here for notification forwarding. So this was an option for third-party wearables to basically get notifications from your iPhone, kind of like the Apple Watch gets, but this will be for third-party wearables not related to Apple. But that apparently was only an EU feature. That was a feature only available in Europe. However, it went missing in beta 2, and it has still not returned in beta 3, even for those in the EU. So I guess we're gonna have to wait and see if this notification forwarding feature actually ships with 26.3. Maybe Apple's just waiting until the RC or the final release to put it back in, but apparently for those in Europe, it is still missing as of the third beta. Now, I should also mention that iOS 26.3 beta 3 might very well add support for the AirTags too. So if you are planning to get the AirTag 2 later on this week, I would assume that it will work with iOS 26.3 beta 3. I cannot make any guarantees on that because I've not been able to verify that. I don't have the AirTag 2 just yet, but if you're wondering about that, you should have access to that. If not, you will get it very soon with the RC build of 26.3. That will for sure include support for the AirTag 2. And since I know you guys are going to ask me, because you ask me in every single video, is the keyboard fixed? So as of right now, it feels about the same to me as it does in 26.2.1, the update that was also just released today. So, me personally, I haven't had an issue with the keyboard in quite some time, so I'm not really the best one to say if it's been fixed or not, because I really haven't been having the issue like a lot of you guys have. So my best advice is just to update and check and see if it's been fixed, and just let me know and relay that information in the comments. But for me, I'm not having any issues with the keyboard. Keyboard is not lagging, and also the keys that I'm pressing are actually the keys that are being output. So I'm not having the big issue that a lot of people are having. Now, also earlier, I mentioned that the HomeKit devices had issues or some bugs in 26.2, and those are fixed in 26.2.1. While I was also having those issues in 26.3, beta 1 and beta 2, but those appear to be fixed here in beta 3. So again, a lot of my favorites up here, especially, and pretty much all of my devices in here, except for the ones down here in the garage, they all showed waiting. It just showed waiting, and it showed like an exclamation point, and it was not actually showing me my data until like 5 minutes after being in the app, or sometimes I'd have to force quit it. But now every single time I go in here, everything is updated, and of course I would assume that's fixed in the control center as well if you have your HomeKit devices in the control center. But aside from that, I don't really think there's too much going on in terms of bugs or bug fixes here with this third beta. Now, as far as the performance goes, I did run a fresh Geekbench 6 test as usual, and I scored a 3883 single core, 9959 on the multi-core. You can see how that compares to the previous build. So actually a very high single core here compared to beta 2. But you can see it's slightly lower on the multi-core, at least compared to beta 2. But again, don't take those as the Bible. It's just very, hit or miss with those scores in terms of how the performance actually is. But just using the device, it feels very similar to beta 2. Like I said before, don't really expect any type of performance jump from 26.2 to 26.3. I think with 26.4, we could potentially see that. There's a lot more being changed in the code and the software for that version, so we'll have to wait and see. It could make it slower as well. So I guess you guys will just have to watch my videos to determine if it's better or worse performance-wise in that next version. But as far as battery life goes, I would also not expect too much to change here with battery life. I'm not going to spend too long here. Obviously I just installed it, but even with the previous beta, I didn't really notice a big jump or decrease from the first beta, and I would expect a similar story here with beta 3. So you guys let me know what I started the video with. I'm currently at 91%. That's really the best way to gauge these betas early on, but so far seems very similar to the previous beta. All right, so now let's talk about what to expect next from Apple, because this is where things get very interesting. Because as I said in the intro, today was the first time in 4 years that Apple released a public iOS version and a developer beta iOS version on the same day. Now, it did happen before that where Apple re-released a beta software, but I'm not going to count that. I mean a fresh new beta and a fresh new iOS update, like public update. It's the first time since iOS 15, which is quite crazy. So with that being said, where do we go from here? So we really didn't expect to see a 26.3 beta 3. You know, a lot of people assume that we were just going to jump to RC, myself included. But right now, it looks like we're not actually going to see the final release of iOS 26.3 in January at all. So that's also going to be the first time in multiple years where we don't get the 0.3 updates in January. So as of right now, it looks pretty much like we're going to see 26.3 in February. So I'd say that we can get the RC build as early as later this week, or we could get the RC build on Monday, February 2nd, and then the final release on Monday, February 9th. So we could be seeing iOS 26.3 as late as the second week of February, which is very interesting. That was not something that was easy to predict. I don't think anybody predicted that one. So yeah, that's a possibility. If we do somehow get the RC later this week, we could see 26.3 release to the public next week on the week of February 2nd. It really just depends at this point when Apple releases the RC. That's going to determine when we can see the final release. But it's pretty telling that today Apple released a public update, 26.2.1. This is, there's kind of something hidden in there. Not really hidden, but there's a message in that. If Apple was going to release 26.3 this week, they would not release 26.2.1 on a Monday. So that pretty much guarantees that we're not going to see 26.3 until February, in my opinion. So that's interesting. And, that's what we can expect next. Now, once 26.3 does get released to the public, whether that's the first week or the second week of February, we should be seeing the first betas of iOS 26.4 go out, pretty much on the next day after the release of 26.3, at least the same week. That's what I would expect. And then, of course, we're not going to see the final release of iOS 26.4. That's the big update with the Siri revamp with Google Gemini. We're not going to see that release until late March, potentially even early April, especially now that we're getting 26.3 later than expected. That's also going to push back 26.4 a little bit. So that is iOS 26.3 beta 3, a very minor update. And I really contemplated making this video because there's really not a lot to talk about feature set wise, but I did want to give you guys an update on the timeline for what to expect with the iOS 26.3 release. And of course, just notify you guys that the update did in fact come out. So, sometimes I contemplate making these videos, especially because there's really not a ton, like I said, feature set wise that's new, but you guys let me know in a comment down below. Do you want me to continue making these smaller beta update videos like this, or do you want me to focus more on the main final release and like the big beta updates? You guys, please let me know in a comment down below, especially the viewers who've been watching me for quite some time. I'd really appreciate your input. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video, and hopefully you checked out the 26.2.1 video from earlier today as well. But anyways, guys, thanks again, and I'll see you soon.